Buckle up. We are heading into the final hours of voting and the first results in one of the most consequential midterm elections ever.
It's the high-stakes finish to a fever-pitch campaign.
Are you ready to win this election? I love to win.
Voters making big choices in a nation on edge.
With high prices,
crime is rising.
the constant threat of gun violence,
the woman's right to choose.
What's happening across the U.S. could shake up the balance of power in Congress and shape the next race for the White House.
So speak out, get engaged, vote, vote, vote.
Tonight, Democrats are fighting to hold on to the Senate, knowing a loss of just one seat could cost them the majority.
We need a senator that understands what Pennsylvania's going through, not some guy that has 10 gigantic mansions.
The poster child for the far-left radical part of the Democratic Party, John Fetterman.
Republicans are aiming to win back the House and take back the Speaker's gavel.
We must change direction in Washington.
Everything is at stake.
Both parties hoping to expand their influence by winning governor's offices across the nation.
We will never, ever surrender to the woke agenda.
Governor DeSantis only cares about the White House. He doesn't give a damn about your house.
It's a critical test of the current president's agenda.
We'll get it done because we're already getting it done.
And the former president's grip on the GOP.
Welcome to the new Republican Party.
Will this election set the wheels in motion for a Biden-Trump rematch?
Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans have made their choice, full of anger, violence, hate, and division.
Watching our country go to hell, we may have to do it again.
This is CNN's coverage of Election Night in America. The races for Congress, the contest for governor, and the future of American democracy.
We're taking our state back by storm.
Our democracy is on this ballot.
The people are choosing, the world is watching, and anything is possible until the last vote.
And we are live in Washington on a very suspenseful night in American politics. Voters are deciding control of the United States Congress and the direction of the country over the next 2 years. Welcome to CNN's special coverage of Election Night in America. I'm Jake Tapper. This is the first major election since President Biden took office, and it's the first chance for voters nationwide to weigh in on his record at a moment when so many Americans are struggling with high inflation and economic anxiety. Republicans believe that will work to their advantage as they fight to win the 218 House seats they need to reclaim the majority. That's 5 more seats than they have now. The battle will take place in 82 key House races, competitive contests that could go either way. In the closely divided Senate, Republicans need 51 seats to take back control. That's only 1 more seat than they have now. We're watching 13 key races that will be crucial to the fight for the Senate. Another factor in this election, former President Donald Trump, who has endorsed a slew of Republicans who support his false claims about the 2020 election. Some of them could have influence over certifying the results in 2024 or refusing to do so if they win tonight. That includes some of the candidates for governor and races playing out in 36 states across the nation, among them the pivotal battlegrounds of Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Florida. Covering all of this tonight, Dana Bash, Abby Phillip, Chris Wallace, and our entire election team. John King is over at the Magic Wall. He'll help us make sense of the results by mapping out the races district by district. As we await the first votes, Casey Hunt is standing by. She's following all 35 Senate contests, including the crucial key races. Boris Sanchez will be reporting results from those 36 governors contests across the U.S. David Chalian's here, too. He's getting ready to roll out the first exit polls on what voters are thinking. And Brianna Keeler's at our voting desk, keeping tabs on how the ballots are being counted in each state and any issues at polling places. We also have correspondents spread out across the country at candidates' headquarters and at vote counting centers. They're also right here in Washington, D.C. First, let's go to Manu Raju. He's at the headquarters of House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. Manu, how confident is McCarthy feeling right now?
Good evening from NBC News election headquarters. Tonight, all eyes on which party will control Congress.
Democrats clinging to razor-thin margins in both chambers with the entire House and dozens of Senate seats on the ballot and many Americans unhappy with the state of the economy. Republicans may be poised to regain power tonight.
Election night 2022. Millions of Americans voting at the polls and by mail. The question to be answered tonight, who will control Congress?
Democrats trying to cling to a razor-thin margin of control in both the Senate and the House.
I'm going to stand up for the best in the American spirit.
Democracy is on the ballot this year.
Republicans on offense, aiming to seize the upper hand once again.
They're fleeing these failed states because these states don't work.
With the influence of the former president looming large.
President Trump taught us how to fight, and I took a few notes.
What that means for the direction of the country.
High drama and high stakes from coast to coast tonight in an election unlike any other, as America decides who will tip the balance of power.
From NBC News, Decision 2022, The Balance of Power. Here now are Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie.
Hi, it's 8 o'clock on the East Coast, and the polls have just closed in 16 states, including the closely watched Senate races in Pennsylvania and Florida. Hi, everybody. I'm Savannah Guthrie here alongside Lester Holt, Chuck Todd, Andrew Mitchell, and Hallie Jackson. And it promises to be an exciting and a long night.
Get comfortable. We'll be here a while, folks. We're here with the entire NBC News team to bring you all the latest results and what they will mean for you on this historic night. To set the stage, all 435 House seats, 35 Senate seats, and 36 governor's mansions are up for grabs tonight.
The Republicans only need a net gain of 1 seat in the Senate and 5 seats in the House to take control of both houses of Congress. The political winds may be at their backs tonight, and we already have some results to share with you this morning. We can project a winner here at NBC News in the Florida Senate race. Marco Rubio will go to the Senate for a 3rd term. He beat his opponent, Val Demings, the former Orlando police chief. Let's go to Pennsylvania. A lot of folks watching this one, and you're going to be waiting a while. It is too early to call. John Fetterman, Mehmet Oz battling it out for the open seat in Pennsylvania and in New Hampshire. Another one with some late momentum for the Republican in the race, Maggie Hassan, the incumbent, holding on at this hour, but it is too early to call.
We've got a projection in the Alabama Senate race. Katie Britt, former chief of staff to the outgoing senator, will go on to victory tonight. That's the projection. In Kentucky, too early to call. Richard Blumenthal trying to hang on to his seat in Connecticut. Illinois, the Senate race there is too early to call.
Let's go to Maryland. There's a Senate race there. It is too early to call. Chris Van Hollen, the incumbent, leading at this hour. In Missouri, same situation. Too early to call, but Eric Schmidt, the Republican, leading at this hour. And in Oklahoma, James Lankford will return to the United States Senate in his race.
And in the other Oklahoma race, Mark Wayne Mullen, the projected winner over Democrat Kendra Horn. In Georgia's Senate, this is one that may keep us here a while, even weeks. Too early to call on that Senate showdown between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. Ohio Senate. Right now, it is too early to call. You can see Tim Ryan, the Democrat, leading, but that race too early to call.
Let's go to North Carolina. The Senate race there, hotly contested. Too early to call there. Sherry Beasley, the former state Supreme Court justice, up against Ted Budd. So here's where we stand at this hour. Democrats with 36 seats, Republicans with 36 seats. Currently a 50-50 matchup there in the Senate, but we will see if that changes tonight. And we want to start getting into the governor's races at this hour, and we will project that Ron DeSantis cruises to victory over Charlie Crist by double digits in the state of Florida.
The Pennsylvania governor's race, Josh Shapiro, Doug Mastriano, that is too early to call. Mastriano, the Trump-backed candidate in that race. The Georgia governor's race, a rematch here, too early to call between Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp. Alabama governor's race. It looks like Kay Ivey, the projected winner, will continue to be a lead that state.
Connecticut's governor's race, too early to call. Ned Lamont, the incumbent, trying to hang on there. In Illinois, also too early to call. J.B. Pritzker, the incumbent. And in Maine, an open seat for Governor Janet Mills versus Paul LePage. Excuse me, not an open seat. We've got the incumbent Janet Mills. That is too early to call, but the Democrat is leading there.
Maryland governor's race. Let's see where we stand right there. I believe it's too early to call between we'll move on to the Massachusetts race. Also too early to call. Maura Healey, the Democrat, Jeff Deal, the Republican there. And New Hampshire governor's race, too early to call in that race as well.
Oklahoma has a governor's race that was very contentious. Kevin Stitt, the incumbent, up against Joy Hoffmeister. Too early to call, but Governor Stitt is leading at this hour. In Rhode Island, it is too early to call that race. We'll go to South Carolina now, and we will project that the incumbent, Henry McMaster, will win handily over his challenger. And let's go to Tennessee's governor's race. Too early to call there, but the incumbent Bill Lee is leading at this hour. So we've got kind of a slate of governor's races, state houses. We've got the Congress at stake. It's got a lot to talk about. We got our whole team with us.
Good evening on this critical election night in America. It is now 8 p.m. in the East, 5 p.m. in the West. At this hour, polls are now closing in 16 states, including the key battlegrounds of Pennsylvania, Florida, and New Hampshire. The polls have already closed in Ohio and in Georgia tonight. All eyes on the high-stakes Senate races there. And let's take a look tonight at the numbers coming in already. You can see in Florida at this hour, ABC News can now project that Ron DeSantis has been reelected as governor. Talk will immediately turn to whether or not he runs for president in 2024. Now to the Senate in Florida. Senator Marco Rubio seeking a third term. He will return to the Senate. It was a race against Congresswoman Val Demings, one-time police chief in Orlando, considered a very solid candidate. A lot of talk about her as a potential running mate a couple of years ago for Joe Biden, but Marco Rubio easily wins a re-election to the Senate. In Georgia at this hour, a race we continue to watch. The results, 31% of the vote in, still very early. Raphael Warnock with an early lead, the incumbent over Herschel Walker, but this is expected to tighten as the night goes on. In Pennsylvania tonight, the polls have just closed. We're tracking this. The numbers expected at any moment. Our first batch of data, John Fetterman up against Mehmet Oz, obviously in Pennsylvania. The whole country aware of this race. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Up to the north in New Hampshire, Senator Maggie Hassan seeking a second term. She won the last time by just about 1,000 votes. 7% of the vote in very early tonight. A sizable lead over Don Bolduc, an election denier, until he then said Biden did win. He changed. There was a little bit of whiplash there in that state. But the polls in New Hampshire have grown very tight going into Election Day. This is going to be a race we watch very closely tonight. We're also watching North Carolina at this hour. The Senate race there, Sherry Beasley up against Congressman Ted Budd. Sherry Beasley in the lead, but again, early, 45% of the vote in North Carolina. To Ohio we go. The Democrat there, Congressman Tim Ryan, 10-term congressman trying to get elected to Senate in Ohio, which has gone Republican the last couple of presidential cycles, up against J.D. Vance, supported by Donald Trump there. Tim Ryan with an early lead, but again, it's very early. Governor Mike DeWine already winning his race for governor in Ohio. Those are some of the races we're following at this hour. Our entire team standing by live in the studio and across the country. ABC News Election Night in America starts right now.
This is an ABC News special, Election Night 2022. Tonight, the stakes could not be higher. Who will control Congress and state houses across the country? The key races that could determine everything, from your wallet to safety in our streets, even our climate, a woman's right to choose, and President Biden's agenda. It's all on the line tonight. So many Americans casting their vote early. A record 45 million engaging in democracy like never before. Results already coming in. Our correspondents are live all across the country, ready to break it all down. Your voice, your vote. Election Night 2022. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on this election night in America. We are witnessing what could be one of the most defining midterm elections in U.S. history. Millions of Americans across the country tonight determining who will control the Senate, who will control the House. The key issues, the economy, inflation, abortion rights, crime, and immigration. And in recent days, President Biden arguing protecting our democracy is also on the ballot. Of course, the president and the Democrats hoping their handling of the economy so far, their efforts to respond to inflation will be enough to convince Americans to stay the course. But this White House knows Americans are feeling this. The prices they're paying for everything from gas to groceries. Will the voters turn to the Republicans on the economy instead? The party in the White House, as you know at home, almost always faces a tough midterm election with very few exceptions. We'll dive into that tonight and take a look at this evening. These are the two numbers you will hear over and over again tonight. In the Senate, Republicans need a net gain of just 1 seat to take control of the Senate. In the House, Republicans need a net gain of just 5 seats to take back control of the House. Again, Republicans need 1 seat in the Senate, 5 seats in the House to take back control. We'll be tracking it all. 35 Senate races, 36 gubernatorial races, and all 435 House seats up for grabs tonight. The ABC News Powerhouse political team here in the studio and our correspondents across the country tonight, what they're hearing from the campaigns, what they're seeing on the ground. You can see they're ready to go live. I'm joined here at the desk by John Carl tonight, Cecilia Vega, my friends Lindsay Davis, Martha Raddatz. Everybody is here, including the 3 big boards tonight. Rick Klein, Rachel Scott, Nate Silver from 538. We have a lot to get to, but I want to get right to Lindsay Davis because the exit polls are already telling a portrait of America tonight, the issues driving the voters to the polls.
And they are what we thought they were going to be. Gas and groceries. I had the opportunity to crisscross the country, South Carolina to South Dakota, and ask the candidates what's most important to the voters in your state. They all said at that time it's the economy. That was anecdotal. Now we have the numbers bearing it out. Take a look at what voters are saying. 32% most important issue when voting, inflation. Followed not too far behind by abortion. So we're talking about more than a quarter of people saying that that was top of mind for them. And then crime, gun policy, and immigration. But I do want to focus for a moment on the inflation because, again, we haven't seen numbers like this since the 80s. And that doesn't bode so well for the Democrats because, by and large, this election cycle, you have people who are saying by 54%, we trust the Republicans to handle inflation compared to 42%. So we're talking about a 12-point margin there. And, of course, the name that looms large that's not on the ballot, Joe Biden. Take a look at his approval ratings here. 45%. Now, by and large, that's pretty much in line with what we've seen for presidents in past midterms. It's exactly 45% is what Donald Trump had in 2018. And I know you're asking who had the lowest ever, David, right? You want to know?
Please.
27%. That was Harry Truman back in 1946, just 1 year after he dropped the atomic bomb. But it might as well be just that bad for Biden because he had a number of Democratic candidates who didn't even want to campaign with him, especially in those key states, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia.
It's always that delicate dance whether to let him come campaign or keep him at arm's length. And we've seen that from so many of the candidates, particularly in these very close Senate races where they were basically tied going into election night.
Tonight, America decides, the biggest night in politics. The balance of power is on the line, and we take you to the states everyone is watching. And already tonight, we've got breaking news as Republicans are increasingly optimistic they could take back control of Congress. Our coverage starts right now.
This is a CBS News special, America Decides Campaign 22. Now reporting from CBS News election headquarters in Times Square, Norah O'Donnell.
Good evening and welcome to CBS News Election Night headquarters, and our powerhouse political team will break down the biggest races in America with the key issues voters care most about. We have reporters on the ground covering every major race across the country, bringing you the latest information from the battleground states. We also have CBS News' unparalleled analysis, data, and the best team in politics. Already tonight, we have breaking news. CBS News rates the House as leaning Republican. And there's been record-shattering turnout for early voting, with more than 45 million Americans casting their ballots even before today. But there are some warning signs tonight for Democrats about the makeup of the electorate. And as polls have closed in 25 states, we have fresh clues from bellwether races as to who will control the House of Representatives. At this hour, Republicans are increasingly confident that they will wrest control from Democrats and install Kevin McCarthy as the next Speaker of the House. For the Senate, Republicans need to pick up just one seat. The outcome of these midterms will determine the future of Joe Biden's presidency as Donald Trump teases he'll announce a third run for the White House next week. We have new reporting from our chief election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa, tonight. Bob?
Good to be with you, Nora. Just got off the phone with House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. He is on the brink of becoming the next Speaker of the House. From Bakersfield, California. He outlined to CBS News in a one-on-one interview what that would mean for the country, said investigations of the Biden administration on COVID, Afghanistan. The Justice Department said he wants to sit down with President Biden, talk about spending cuts in exchange for a debt limit extension. He also called former President Trump an ally and very helpful in any GOP gains made tonight. And he noted he has been huddling in recent days with former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, of course, from 1994, and that Republican wave.
Robert Costa with that breaking news and that exclusive interview with the man who could be the next Speaker of the House. Want to bring in our chief political analyst, John Dickerson. What will you be looking for tonight?
Well, I'm just going to pick up where Bob was, because listen to what his sentence was. McCarthy's going to have investigations and then sit down with Biden. Those are two things directly at odds with each other, and that's part of the challenge for a McCarthy speakership, if there is one. Also, I don't know what our exit polls are going to show, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to show that Americans wanted investigations. This will be one of the early challenges. How much does a majority investigate? How much does a majority deal with the issues that Americans are burning about prices, education, and other things?
Wow, tonight is already getting interesting. Wow, and we're just getting started. Gail King, I know you have been talking to voters. People are frustrated.
They're very frustrated, and Nora, they're exhausted. I'm glad that our coverage is called America Decides, because this is really happening. America, you are deciding, even as we speak right now, but they're just ready to move on. And to your point, John, I think people are tired of investigations. They're tired of the bickering. They're just exhausted. That said, people said they still have a lot of hope. They still have a lot of hope. We still live in the United States of America, and they believe that we can figure out a way to get this done. But right now, it is extremely bumpy. I was at my polling place today. Listen, I've been voting since I was 18. I was thrilled to walk in and vote again. And of course, I'm talking to people in line. It was a short line. And somebody said, you know, we used to vote for the best candidate. Now I vote for who is not the worst candidate. Not exactly ideal, and you wouldn't say who he was voting for, but there's a little bit of that as well.
Wow, we'll hear more from the exit poll analysis, too, about what drove people to the polls. And let's get straight to the results now in key states. CBS News declares Ron DeSantis, he is the projected winner, I should say, as governor of Florida. Also in the Senate race there, CBS News projects that Senator Marco Rubio is the winner in that Florida Senate race. In Pennsylvania, this is the most expensive Senate race in the country. It is a toss-up at this hour. As you can see, the votes will be trickling in slowly tonight. In Georgia, our current rating is a toss-up in this contest. Again, these are very early numbers. We must caution at this hour. This is going to change a lot throughout the night, but we're going to let you know as the vote is counted in the governor's race. You can see CBS News is rating this lean Republican. The numbers may not show that yet again because just 32% of the vote is coming in at this hour. And in Ohio, this is key. CBS News rates this as lean Republican for J.D. Vance. Just 20% of the vote in there, but we'll have more on that Senate race coming up. And in North Carolina, CBS News rates the North Carolina Senate race as lean Republican for Congressman Ted Budd.
From MSNBC, Decision 2022, live from Democracy Plaza.
And here we go. It is 6 p.m. on the East Coast. I'm Rachel Maddow, coming to you live from our election night studio here at MSNBC headquarters. My companions on this long journey in tonight are here with me now. Joy Reid, Nicole Wallace, Chris Hayes, the great Ari Melber. We'll have many other of our colleagues joining us throughout the evening. We have water, we have painkillers, we have jerky, including weird jerky. We have 30 different kinds of chocolate. We're going to be fine. Steve Kornacki is at the big board. He is contractually obligated to avoid sleep for the foreseeable future. So please spare some kind of thoughts for our beloved Steve. He can't even hear us right now. The roaring in his ears is too amazing. The first polling places have just closed in parts of Kentucky and Indiana. We'll be getting our first results in any minute. The rest of the polls in those states will close in 1 hour at 7 p.m. Eastern, along with polls in a whole bunch of states: Vermont, South Carolina, Virginia, parts of Florida, also the all-important state of Georgia, where one of the tightest and hardest-fought Senate races in the country could determine which party controls the United States Senate. Over 44 million Americans voted early this year. And I know big numbers mean nothing in the abstract, but that means the record-setting early vote from the last midterm elections in 2018, which everybody thought was unbeatable, those numbers have already been beaten in the early vote this time around. Now, people who didn't vote early have been lining up all across the country today to cast ballots. There are many hours of voting left to go in many states. On the line tonight, as you know, control of both chambers of Congress. Democrats have an uphill battle to keep control of the House, where they have a very narrow majority right now. And history says the president's party always loses a significant number of seats, and particularly in a first-term midterm election like President Biden's party is facing now. In the Senate, it is democratically controlled, but it's 50-50. And it absolutely appears to be a jump ball tonight, which means it could hinge on any one of a number of extremely close races. Also on the line tonight, 36 governor's races, hotly contested races for Attorney General and Secretary of State. In some states tonight, the vote could determine whether abortion is banned. Democrats, including President Biden and former President Obama, have been warning heading into today that democracy itself is on the ballot. And even though that sounds like a slogan with a lot of happy American patriotic sounding words, it means something very specific this year. Something like 300 election deniers are running for office as Republicans across the country tonight. If they win, some of them could be in charge of how the next elections play out, whether vote totals are certified, whether winners are allowed to win, whether losers will have to acknowledge that they lost. It's that fundamental. When it comes to tonight's vote, Republicans are telling their supporters they ought to be suspicious of what's expected to be a long ballot counting process in lots of different states. In particular, we've seen Republican legal maneuvers in the state of Pennsylvania today, even today, make it more likely that the vote counting in Pennsylvania will last through much of this week. With a super tight Senate race in Pennsylvania, which could very well decide control of the U.S. Senate, we, of course, expect that Republicans will use the drawn-out process, which they caused in Pennsylvania, as supposed evidence of something being wrong with the vote there. Republican former President Trump is already telling his supporters to protest today's vote, already saying there's so much wrong with today's vote. We'll have more on that later on and over the course of the evening. But for now, voting continues across the country. We've got a big, long night ahead, which we mean in the best possible way. We are just getting started here. Now, my compatriots, y'all retired last night. No, there was discussion of caffeine and intermittent fasting and stamina already. But I feel like it is actually a healthy thing for the country that we are inoculated to expect a long night. We are inoculated to expect not only a long evening, but a long week of counting. Yeah.
After months of campaigning, media coverage, and campaign ads, the battle for Congress all coming down to tonight. Just under 1 hour now to the first poll closings in key battleground states in the 2022 midterms. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brett Baer.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Martha McCallum, and it is election night, folks. All that counts now
is the actual vote. The final tallies across the nation will determine which party can call the shots on the Hill for the next couple of years. Right now, we've got a split Senate. Right down the middle, folks, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans, with the vice president able to cast that deciding vote. Now, one seat here could really change everything. The Biden agenda would hang in the balance.
Voters have been lining up at the polls throughout the day today. Georgia's polls close in the next hour, and Pennsylvania the hour after that.
But not all states count and report their votes the same way. And here's where it's going to get pretty tricky, and we're going to guide you through this tonight. Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are known to be historically slow counting states. They start opening the mail-in ballots at 7 a.m. on Election Day. Other states like Florida and Texas, they start processing those ballots that come in before Election Day. Therefore, it will happen there probably much faster.
Virginia's quick, too. That's why we always warn against what's called the red or blue mirage. It may seem in the early hours of the night that one party has a clear advantage, but it may be short-lived. We'll guide you through this as the night goes on.
So this election comes as our nation deals with crises on multiple fronts. We've got runaway inflation, we have out-of-control crime, and we have a disaster that has unfolded on the southern border. Tonight will be the difference between what gets prioritized and what gets put to the side. Here's how the numbers break down. First, on the Senate side of the Congress, where both parties have no room for error, there are 50 Republicans and 48 Democrats in the Senate, but you've got 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. That makes a total of 50 for each party. But Democrats have control because they have Vice President Harris's tie-breaking vote. Republicans need to gain just 1 seat to take the majority. So the Senate could come down to just a few key races.
Now over to the House side of the Capitol. Democrats hold a razor-thin majority with 220 seats, while Republicans have 212. There are 3 vacancies, with 1 likely to remain in Republican hands after a special election. That would mean the GOP needs a net gain of 5 seats to take control of the House. We have more than 25 reporters spread across the battleground states throughout the country. Take a look at them there. We'll get to all of them throughout the evening.
Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, it's Election Day. After a contentious campaign season, voters cast their ballots to determine which party controls Congress and more. What the results could mean for the Biden agenda and for the nation. Then, one-on-one, we sit down with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for one of her first interviews since her husband was violently attacked at their home. Plus, we speak with House Republican Policy Chair Gary Palmer about his party's top priorities. And democracy on the ballot, how some candidates are still spreading false information, eroding trust in the voting process, raising the stakes in this year's elections. All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The balance of power in Congress is being decided on this Election Day as voters have been heading to the polls to decide who will represent them in Washington and at the local and state levels. At this hour, polls have now closed in 6 states: Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. And the Associated Press is prepared to call some of the key races. We have 2 Senate winners to report to you in the state of South Carolina, and this is a hold for the Republicans. Senator Tim Scott will hold on against Democratic challenger Crystal Matthews. Not a surprise, heavily red South Carolina. Tim Scott, the only black Republican serving in the Senate, will now serve his 2nd term. We have another call to make from the Associated Press in the state of Vermont, and that is holding on to that seat for the Democrats, retiring Senator Patrick Leahy, Democrat Peter Welch. Congressman Peter Welch has been elected. The AP calls that race, defeating Republican Gerald Malloy. So we have 2 calls to make, but there are a number of other races we are watching very closely in Georgia. The Senate race between Raphael Warnock, the Democrat, and Herschel Walker, the Republican, and the governor's race in Georgia as well. Brian Kemp being challenged, the incumbent being challenged by Stacey Abrams. The 2nd time the 2 of them have faced one another. And again, races we are watching in Indiana, Kentucky, and as we mentioned, Virginia, some important House races. So let's turn to our panel of experts who are with us here throughout this evening. A lot to talk about. Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. David Brooks, columnist for the New York Times, Washington Post columnist Perry Bacon, Gary Abernathy, also a columnist for the Washington Post. He's based in Ohio. Mark Short, who served as chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence, and Faz Shakir, who was the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. And we are going to welcome all of you back to the table right now. Faz Shakir, I'm going to start with you because we just had a call in the state of Vermont where the man you worked for a long time, Bernie Sanders, he now will be serving alongside Peter Welch.
Well, great news. Senator Sanders, this is a day and age where there aren't very many popular political figures. Bernie Sanders is one. He's popular not only across the nation, but especially in Vermont. He weighed in early on this one. He supported Peter Welch right at the announcement of his campaign, cleared out the field for him. No one challenged Peter Welch, and now he is now going to be a senator from Vermont. I think later, in probably a few minutes, you'll also learn that Becca Ballant will be the next congresswoman from the state of Vermont, again, in a contested primary. Senator Sanders got in fully in support of her, and I think she'll be coming to Congress from Vermont as well soon.
And if I remember correctly, she'd be the first woman elected to Congress from the state of Vermont. So the other race we just called, Amy Walter, South Carolina. You have a little knowledge of that state, so I'm going to turn to you.
Spend some time there, yes.
Tim Scott, not surprised.
It wasn't a surprising race. No. I think we're going to be talking a lot about Tim Scott, though, going into 2023 and 2024 as a potential presidential candidate. He is someone that a lot of Republicans like to have on the trail with them. He's also done a very good job raising money for himself and for other candidates. So not a hard re-election, but certainly somebody who is going to be talked about a lot more.
And so far, David Brooks, a lot of what we're watching tonight is candidates who were endorsed by former President Trump. We know Tim Scott had that endorsement. To what extent does how well Donald Trump do tonight, do you think speaking of 2024, affect that?
I think a little. I think the support for Trump on the Republican side is broad, but maybe a little shallower than some people think. And so if some of the candidates he picked and really pushed up there end up losing, Mehmet, J.D. Vance, in Arizona, Blake Masterson, and so if they end up losing, and it seems like, he cost us some seats. Kerry Lake loses, Arizona governor, then that's bad for him. And then the other little thing that has some presidential implications is how well does Ron DeSantis do in his governor's race? Mm-hmm. Does he do super well? Does he do super well with Latinos? If he does super well, that sort of burnishes his image. So it won't be dispositive, but it influences how people feel about Donald Trump a little, how tonight goes.
Mark Short, as somebody who's worked in Republican politics for a while, and as we pointed out, have worked for former Vice President Mike Pence and have advised certainly other Republicans in office today. How much does a midterm election like this affect what happens 2 years later?
I don't know that it does have a dramatic impact. I think that probably there's a bigger impact in the primary races. And I think you look at President Trump was successful and he has a big influence on the party, getting some of his nominees through primaries. But As David said, even there, I think that the support may be more shallow than is often reported in those cases where there were competitive primaries. His candidates for winning was somewhere between 30 to 35% of the vote. And so I don't think it's going to have as much of an effect actually in the general election. And I think that chapter and verse change tomorrow. And I think it'll be a whole new storyline heading to 2024.
Perry Bacon, we should have pointed out that you are based.
This is NewsNation Decision Desk 22, special coverage of the midterm election.
Good evening. Good to have you with us. I'm Chris Cuomo. Welcome to NewsNation's coverage of the midterm elections. And we begin with good news. People are voting and in big numbers all over the country. And so far, reports of problems, unimpressive. Okay? We're going to likely know the fate of control of the House of Representatives tonight on our watch. History suggests an average of 30 or more seats gained by the minority party. And the Democrats are playing defense in seats all across the country. Now, is there a chance the polls were wrong and that the Democrats remain in control? Possible? Yes. Probable? No proof of that, at least at this point. Now, as for the Senate, as we know, it's evenly divided right now, so only one net seat will change the balance of power, and yet it's not known whether that outcome will come on our watch. Is that a problem? No. Close races have special verification rules in certain states. And if the race is really close, meaning there's not a clear 50+% win, there are runoffs that could occur. We're going to be watching that in Georgia. So here's the state of play. Polls close in 6 states an hour from now, including Georgia. That's where you have Senator Warnock and, of course, Herschel Walker. Close race. Handful of those we must watch. Warnock won in a runoff. He's the first Democrat to sit as a senator from that state in 20 years. Okay? Again, Republicans need to just net 1 seat to take control. Decision Desk HQ. Now, you're going to learn what that means. It's not just a term. We've got a great operation here. They put the probability of that happening at 59%. In the House, Republicans need to net 5 seats to take control. Remember, history dictates at least 30. There are 22 toss-up races for us to watch. Decision Desk expects to know who controls the House sometime shortly after 9 Eastern. So, on our watch, okay? Now, what do we know about where your minds are on this election? Okay, the most recent polling, which are, this is accurate. What people care about, high credibility. Whom they'll vote for, polls are spotting. Inflation is at the top of the list, all right, by a lot, followed by reproductive rights, then crime. So I'm joined tonight by my good friend, Leland Vittert. Now, he has the very important job of counting what happens and working with the Decision Desk. I was very excited that we have that operation. When I say Decision Desk, it's usually just a group of guys and women sitting somewhere. We have a real operation tonight.
We do indeed, Chris, and that's what's the information that's driving our board. We start with the 2020 election results, zero those out, and the board goes gray. As the polls close, the information comes in, and what will empower everything we say and do tonight is the data that comes in. We take a look at the Decision Desk HQ War Room led by Scott Tranter. Friends, hello, wave and say hi. We have enough caffeine for them and enough candy and carbs and pizza to get them through a very long night. They are backed up by thousands, literally, of volunteers around the country. Just in New Hampshire, for example, one of the very close Senate races we are watching, they have 100+ people on the ground just in New Hampshire to watch the results come in and give us the very latest numbers that they are getting all the way down to the township clerk number. From there, they feed all of that into their spreadsheets and then give us the race calls from Decision Desk HQ.
Noticias Telemundo presenta Decisión 2022. Esta noche,
The motion is adopted.
demócratas y republicanos se enfrentan en las elecciones de medio término.
Republicans are dangerous.
No podemos sobrevivir 4 años o 2 años más de esto.
Un referendo para el partido del presidente Joe Biden,
Economy still strong.
donde su manejo de la economía y la inflación siguen golpeando el bolsillo de los votantes.
A mí me asusta la inflación.
La comida, lo que es la canasta familiar, ha subido demasiado.
Otros temas dividen los votos, como la violencia por las armas, el derecho al aborto y la crisis en la frontera.
El venir como inmigrante y pasar como ellos pasan es tan difícil.
porque yo lo viví.
Deberían de poner un poquito mano dura ahí en la frontera.
Esta noche se mide también cuánto poder aún mantiene el expresidente Donald Trump.
They will never get me to stop fighting for you, the American people.
El futuro de los Estados Unidos se decide voto a voto y el voto latino es crucial. El control del Senado y la Cámara Baja están en juego, porque esta noche es la noche de Decisión 2022. Batalla por el poder.
Buenas noches, bienvenidos a la batalla por el poder. Aquí tendremos minuto a minuto todos los resultados, todo el análisis de estas elecciones. El voto por adelantado y por correo ha sobrepasado el de cualquier otra elección intermedia de las últimas décadas. Más de 45 millones de personas votaron ya de forma anticipada. Me acompaña Aranza Lezaga. Aranza, muy buenas noches.
Julio, muy buenas noches para ti, para la gente que nos acompaña. Y en efecto, así es, estas elecciones ocurren cuando el país está profundamente dividido y también politizado. Incluso ya se han entablado demandas pidiendo que se cuenten todas las boletas por correo, en un ambiente en donde algunos incluso cuestionan la legalidad del sistema electoral del país.
Hoy se decide el control de la Cámara de Representantes, el control del Senado, pero en los estados con las contiendas más reñidas los resultados pueden tardar días en llegar. Le diremos lo que sabemos, lo que no sabemos. Aquí estamos comprometidos con usted para llevarlo paso a paso por esta noche.
¿Y qué te parece si ya comenzamos con algunos de los primeros ganadores proyectados de esta gran noche que además es histórica?
Esta noche, Noticias Telemundo proyecta como ganador por la gobernación de Florida al republicano Ron DeSantis.
También contamos con esta proyección. Marco Rubio gana su reelección para el Senado en la Florida.
Seguimos de cerca la carrera a la gobernación de Texas, también todavía muy temprano para poder proyectar a un ganador, el 33% de los votos contabilizados entre Greg Abbott y Beto O'Rourke.
Y es así como se está viendo esta noche electoral. El balance en el Senado todavía está por decidirse. La noche es joven y acabamos de empezar, Julio.
Estos son los primeros resultados de unas elecciones que decíamos despiertan un interés que es inédito, y aquí en Noticias Telemundo te ofrecemos una cobertura de equipo con reporteros distribuidos de costa a costa para que ustedes tengan toda la información que necesitan saber al instante en que sucede.
Y durante las próximas 6 horas de esta cobertura sin precedentes también nos estarán acompañando un panel de invitados y analistas de lujo que nos van a ayudar a poner en perspectiva los resultados durante toda esta jornada electoral.
Vamos a presentárselos. Debbie Murcarsel-Powell, excongresista demócrata. Buenas noches.
También contamos con la presencia de la analista Victoria De Francesco.
El analista republicano Alfonso Aguilar también está con nosotros.
Y nos acompaña el presidente de la Junta de Latino Victory Fund, Luis Miranda.
Clarisa Martínez, vicepresidenta de la Iniciativa por el Voto Latino Unidos US.
Y la analista republicana Adriana Aldín. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes por acompañarnos esta gran noche.
Ya estaremos platicando, hay mucho que opinar, mucho que comentar sobre lo que está sucediendo, pero ¿cuál es nuestro punto de partida? Hasta hoy, el Partido Demócrata tiene el control de las dos cámaras, el Senado y la Cámara de Representantes. Aquí en Telemundo Center tenemos la tecnología más avanzada de realidad aumentada para explicarle lo que está en juego esta noche de las elecciones.
Y con la magia de la televisión pasamos con Joana Suárez con el conteo de los escaños. Adelante, Joana, muy buenas noches.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas noches. Aquí les estaremos informando minuto a minuto cómo va el balance del poder en el Senado y en la Cámara de Representantes. Vamos a echarle un vistazo primero al Senado. Ya le tenemos los primeros resultados de la noche. Actualmente los demócratas tienen 36 escaños, mientras que los republicanos tienen 39. Recuerden esos dos independientes que siempre votan con los demócratas. Y vamos a ver, como ustedes mencionaban, ya tenemos algunos resultados. Una de las contiendas claves en estas elecciones es la Florida, donde el senador Marco Rubio mantiene su posición y se proyecta como ganador. Este sería su tercer mandato. Vámonos ahora a la Cámara de Representantes. Aquí todo está en juego. Los 435 escaños se renuevan y en este momento los demócratas tienen 36 escaños y los republicanos ya tienen 86. El partido que gane 218 escaños se lleva el control de la Cámara y conforme transcurra la noche veremos cómo estas casillas van a ir cambiando a rojo y azul y tendremos una mejor idea de cómo quedará ese balance de poder en el Congreso. Volvemos con ustedes.
Bien, Joana Suárez, muchas gracias. Estaremos volviendo contigo más adelante.
Noticias Univisión presenta.
Muy buenas noches. Hoy se define qué partido llevará las riendas del Congreso por los próximos 2 años.
En estas elecciones de medio término se pondrá a prueba la integridad de los comicios y el respeto a la voluntad de los votantes.
Acompáñanos en esta cobertura, El Poder en Juego.
Se renueva la totalidad de los 435 escaños de la Cámara Baja y 1/3 del Senado. ¿Qué partido político controlará el Congreso? ¿Será el poder hispano? En estos comicios, el voto de los latinos será determinante. Más de 11 millones de hispanos estaban habilitados para votar, a pesar de que en varios estados se promulgaron leyes que restringieron su acceso a las urnas. Son unas elecciones marcadas por el tema de la inflación, el aborto, la violencia y las armas de fuego. También en juego hoy, 36 gobernaciones y 27 secretarías de Estado. El poder en juego.
Muy buenas noches y bienvenidos a esta cobertura especial de noticias. Esta es la pregunta: ¿podrán los republicanos arrebatarle el poder a los demócratas en la Cámara de Representantes?
La otra pregunta: ¿podrán los demócratas mantener el poder en el Senado? En este momento así está la contienda de la Cámara Baja, donde el ganador busca llegar a los 218 representantes. Recordemos que toda la Cámara de Representantes está en juego esta noche, un total de 435 escaños.
Así figura esta noche el Senado, donde el número de la mayoría es 51 senadores. A esta hora más de la mitad del país ha votado con el cierre de los centros de votación en 33 estados.
Tenemos una amplia cobertura de equipo con corresponsales en las contiendas más importantes esta noche. Ahí los ven a todos en los lugares más importantes del país y seguiremos las contiendas más reñidas en los estados que definirán el balance de poder en el Senado.
Y esta noche nos acompaña la excongresista republicana Ileana Ros-Lehtinen y el excongresista demócrata Luis Gutiérrez. Saludos, gracias por estar aquí.
Muchas gracias. También nos acompañan Carlos Díaz Rosillo, analista republicano, y Fabián Núñez, analista demócrata. Gracias nuevamente por acompañarnos en estas coberturas.
Gracias. Y continuamos.
Vamos a pasar con Félix de Bedut, quien nos dirá cómo va el balance de poder en ambas cámaras del Congreso. Adelante, Félix, ¿cómo se ven las cosas a esta hora?
Así es, Silvia. Pues aquí, desde este lugar, vamos a estar hablando de las cifras ya consolidadas, los números exactos. Veamos lo que está pasando en la Cámara de Representantes. Los republicanos tienen 57 frente a 25 de los demócratas. Hay que recordar que el número mágico para ganar el control de la Cámara es 218. Las 435 curules, los 435 escaños están en juego todos. Vamos ahora con el Senado para saber lo que está pasando allí. Estas son las cifras que se conocen a esta hora del Senado. 41 demócratas frente a 40 republicanos. Número para ganar el 51, aunque también el 50 le podría servir a los demócratas para mantener lo que tienen en este momento. Vamos a los pendones, a la parte de arriba de nuestro set virtual, para que veamos lo que ha pasado en el Senado. A esta contienda, a diferencia de lo que pasa en la Cámara, el Senado, 29 republicanos no están en juego, 36 demócratas no están en juego. Los republicanos han ganado ya 11 frente a 5 que han ganado los demócratas. Con este panorama comenzamos la noche recordando que aunque estas son las cifras, lo cierto es que en la Cámara de Representantes son unas 40 disputas las que van a definir todo. En el Senado 5, pero de eso más, nos va a hablar más adelante León.
Muchísimas gracias y por supuesto estaremos yendo contigo a lo largo de toda esta cobertura. Estamos tratando de entender qué es lo que ocurre aquí en los Estados Unidos y cómo los hispanos estamos yendo de grandes números a poder. Así que además de los 3 senadores hispanos que buscan reelegirse esta noche, hay un número récord, esto es importante, de 82 latinos que están buscando escaños en la Cámara de Representantes, Silvia.
Entre ellos también hay un número récord de 36 mujeres hispanas.
Así que por ahora lo que queremos hacer es proyectar las siguientes victorias del poder latino. Lo vamos a hacer durante toda la noche. Y vamos a comenzar con Marco Rubio, el senador por el estado de la Florida. Una fácil victoria. Muchos están preguntando si ahora buscará también la candidatura presidencial. Luego se lo preguntamos a Eliana.
Vamos a ver ahora a la proyección de Maxwell Alejandro Frost por el Distrito 10 de la Florida. Él es la primera persona de la generación Z, es decir, de los que tienen entre 20 y 30 años en este momento, que llega a la Cámara de Representantes. Es demócrata, un gran activista a favor del control de las armas, fue conductor de Uber, se ha hecho un camino impresionante este joven.
25 años y comenzó a los 15 a hacer su campaña política. Mario Díaz-Balart, a quien conocemos muy bien en el estado de la Florida, ha conseguido la reelección en el distrito número 26 de la Florida. Aquí, hasta el momento, no hay absolutamente ninguna sorpresa.
María Elvira Salazar, por el distrito 27 de la Florida, gana el escaño, mantiene el escaño para su segundo periodo en el Congreso. María Elvira es una conocida periodista, ¿no?, durante muchos años.
Carlos Jiménez, a quien se le conoce perfectamente en la ciudad de Miami, ha obtenido su reelección en el distrito 28 de la Florida. Y como ven, nos estamos enfatizando en estos momentos en estados donde ya han cerrado las elecciones y, por supuesto, en el este, la costa este de los Estados Unidos.
Ana Paulina Luna, por el distrito número 13 de la Florida. Es muy importante porque este es un escaño que le han robado a los demócratas. Este distrito 13 pertenecía a quien se lanzó a la gobernación de la Florida, Charlie Crist.
Y la siguiente que tenemos es Darren Soto. Es su tercer mandato elegido en la Cámara de Representantes de los Estados Unidos en el 2016. Darren Soto es abogado y consigue, por supuesto, su reelección. Y lo que estamos viendo aquí, esperemos que crezca a lo largo de toda la noche, Ilian, pero estamos viendo el poder latino de cómo poco a poco vamos a ir poblando esa maravillosa pantalla.
Así es, y ahí vamos a ver las imágenes de los representantes a la Cámara y de los senadores hispanos que llevan la representación de nuestra comunidad. También tenemos algunas proyecciones, Jorge, del Senado.
Esto es lo que tenemos hasta el momento. Charles Schumer de Nueva York fácilmente se reelige en ese estado y es una de las principales voces del Partido Demócrata, una de las más poderosas frente al expresidente Donald Trump. Seguramente escucharemos mucho más de él.
También tenemos a Tim Scott, ganador por Carolina del Sur, gana ese escaño. Él pertenece al Partido Republicano.
Continuamos con las proyecciones para el Senado. Peter Wedge, ganador del Partido Demócrata para el pequeño pero importante e influyente estado de Vermont.
Vamos a ver el siguiente, es Ron Paul, que también mantiene su escaño por el Partido Republicano, el estado de Kentucky.
Y ahora vamos a pasar y esto es sumamente interesante, vamos a hablar de lo que ha estado ocurriendo en el estado de la Florida para hablar de gobernadores.
Así es, son 30